The antique brass barometer on the wall hadn't moved in 30 years, but Raymond Foster didn't need it to know a storm was coming. He felt it in his joints, in the heaviness of the air, in the way the gulls had gone silent over Harborside Cove. Standing on the weathered dock of his family's fishing business, Raymond watched dark clouds gather on the horizon, transforming the usually blue Maine sky into a canvas of charcoal and slate. The Sea Whisper, his 40-foot trawler, creaked against her moorings, the faded blue paint peeling from decades of salt and sun. Like him, she was past her prime but still seaworthy. At least that's what Raymond told the bank every time they threatened to foreclose. 3 generations of Fosters had captained this vessel, pulled lobster and cod from these waters, built a modest living from the unforgiving Atlantic. Now it might all end with him. Max, his aging golden retriever, pressed against Raymond's leg, sensing his master's unease. 10 years as Raymond's only steady companion since Clara's diagnosis, the dog had become an extension of himself. Another weathered old-timer refusing to be put out to pasture. A gust of wind carried the conversation from the harbor master's office through an open window. "Foster's still running that death trap, man, doesn't know when to quit." The voice belonged to Marshall Harrington, the Boston developer who'd spent the past year buying up Harborside's waterfront. 3 fishing businesses had already sold out. Raymond's was among the last holdouts. Raymond didn't turn around. The notice in his pocket made noise enough. Final warning from First Atlantic Bank, due date, circled in red. Clara's medical bills had drained what little savings they'd had, and the dwindling catches of recent years had left him treading water at best. One more good haul might buy him time, might let him keep the business until Michael could decide if he wanted it. The thought of his son brought a familiar ache. Michael Foster, 32. Harvard Law, now working for some environmental nonprofit in Boston. They barely spoke these days, just holiday calls and the occasional text. Ever since Clara's funeral 3 years ago, the distance between them had grown beyond mere miles. Michael blamed his father for being at sea during his mother's final days. Raymond had never found the words to explain that working was the only way he knew to fight back against the helplessness. Max barked once, bringing Raymond back to the present. Down the dock, Harrington was stepping from his gleaming SUV, Italian shoes incongruous against the salt-stained planks. 2 men in suits followed, carrying leather portfolios and expressions of practiced patience. Developers, bankers, progress, all coming to sweep away what remained of Harborside's fishing heritage. Raymond's weathered hands gripped the dock railing. The sea had taken much from him over the years, his father to a nor'easter in '86, his brother to the Flemish cap in '95, and in a way it had taken Clara too. The endless absences, the worry lines that formed on her face whenever storm warnings came. But the sea had also given him everything he valued: purpose, livelihood, identity. Some men weren't made for retirement communities and golf courses. Some men needed salt in their lungs and horizon lines to make sense of the world. The decision crystallized like ice on rigging. One last trip before the storm hit. The Weather Service was calling it potentially historic, the kind that reshapes coastlines and rewrites local lore. Every other captain had already secured their vessels battened down for what was coming. But desperation has its own meteorology. As Raymond turned toward the Sea Whisper, his phone vibrated with a text message. Michael's name on the screen sent a jolt through him. "Coming up this weekend. Need to talk about the house. Important." The house, his grandfather's house on the bluff overlooking the harbor, where 3 generations of Fosters had watched for returning fishing vessels, where Clara had spent her final months gazing at the ocean she'd both loved and resented. The weekend would be too late. By then the bank might already have started proceedings. By then the storm would have come and gone. By then Raymond might have lost everything or saved it all. Either way, he'd face his son with something decided, not with hat in hand and shoulders slumped. Max whined, sensing the conflict in his master. Raymond scratched behind the dog's ears, the fur graying like his own beard. "You're with me either way, right, old friend?" The retriever's tail thumped against the weathered planks. A memory surfaced, Clara standing at the door, the same storm-sensing worry in her eyes. The ocean always takes more than it gives, Raymond. Remember that. She had been right, of course. But what she never understood was that for men like him, the taking and giving weren't separate ledger entries to be balanced. They were the same transaction, the price of belonging to something ancient and powerful. Max barked again, more urgently this time. Raymond followed the dog's gaze toward the harbor entrance. For a moment, he thought he saw something, a flash of blue light beneath the water's surface there, and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. Strange but not unprecedented. Phosphorescence maybe, or a trick of the storm light on the waves. That night, while the town prepared for the coming gale, Raymond dreamed of voices calling from beneath dark waters of metal gleaming in depths, where light shouldn't reach, of something ancient, stirring on the ocean floor. He woke before dawn, sheets damp with sweat, the dream clinging to him like morning fog. Max lay at the foot of the bed, eyes reflecting the pre-dawn light, watching his master with unusual intensity. The National Weather Service had upgraded the storm to a potential Category 3 hurricane, unusual for these waters. Evacuation orders for coastal areas would likely come by afternoon. The rational choice was clear: secure the boat board up the house head inland. But Raymond had made his decision. He packed quickly provisions for 3 days foul-weather gear, the old sextant his father had given him, when electronics were still mistrusted luxuries on fishing vessels. As the sun broke weakly through cloud banks to the east, he and Max made their way down to the harbor, the streets still empty except for the occasional emergency vehicle. The harbor master's office was dark. Pete was likely at home, securing his own property. All the better. No one to question Raymond's judgment or try to dissuade him. The Sea Whisper waited, rocking gently against her moorings, ready as she'd always been. As he loaded the last of his gear, a familiar voice cut through the salt air. "Planning your own funeral, Foster." Harrington stood on the dock, hands in the pockets of his expensive raincoat. Even at this hour, he looked manicured and certain, a man accustomed to bending circumstances to his will. Raymond continued his preparations, checking lines, securing hatches. "Just doing what I've always done." Harrington shook his head, a performance of concern that didn't reach his eyes. "There's a hurricane coming. Every other fisherman has the sense to stay put. And you're down here checking on my welfare." Raymond tested the starter, felt the old diesel engine rumble to life beneath his feet. "Worried about your future investment." Harrington's laugh was like crushed glass. "I'm worried about having to explain to the Coast Guard why they need to risk their lives to save a stubborn, old fossil who can't see the future staring him in the face. This," he gestured to the trawler, the docks, the few remaining fishing vessels. "It's all going away, Foster. You're living history and not the kind people preserve." Raymond had heard all this before: progress, market forces, changing times. The same sermon preached over the graves of industries, neighborhoods, ways of life. But there was something new in Harrington's tone today, something almost desperate. The developer stepped closer, lowering his voice though no one else was around to hear. "I've got investors flying in next week. Zoning boards already approved the preliminary plans for harborside shores. Luxury condos, boutique hotel yacht slips where these fishing boats are now. I need your property to complete the package." Raymond turned to face the man fully for the first time. "And you think I'm going to drown out there, save you the trouble of negotiating?" The silence that followed told Raymond all he needed to know. He'd meant it as an accusation, not a genuine question, but Harrington's expression, that flicker of calculation, was answer enough. Raymond finished his preparations in silence, Harrington watching from the dock. As he cast off the lines, the developer called out one last time. "Your son called my office yesterday. Did he tell you that smart young man? Seems he understands what you don't." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Michael talking to Harrington about what's selling the house, the business. Raymond's hands tightened on the wheel as he guided the Sea Whisper away from the dock. Max, standing beside him in the wheelhouse, hackles slightly raised as he watched the shrinking figure on shore. The harbor was a ghost town, empty slips where the fishing fleet should have been. They'd all headed upriver to safer moorings or been trailered inland. Only the larger pleasure craft remained secured with extra lines, their wealthy seasonal owners long gone to comfortable inland homes. As they passed the harbor mouth, the seas immediately grew choppier. The storm was still hours away, according to forecasts, but the ocean knew what was coming. Swells lifted the bow and dropped it with increasing force. In the east, the cloud bank had grown a dark wall advancing toward the coast. Any sane captain would turn back. Raymond pushed forward, setting course for Wilkes Bank, 30 miles offshore, where his father had taught him to find cod when other grounds were fished out. If anywhere would yield the catch he needed, it would be there. Max settled on the worn cushion beside the captain's chair. His usual spot, though his eyes kept moving to the stern, back toward land with unusual frequency. 4 hours later, with the first outer bands of the storm sending sheets of rain across the deck, Raymond knew he'd miscalculated. The fishing was good, better than he'd seen in years, but the weather was deteriorating faster than predicted. The Sea Whisper, designed for coastal waters, was being tested by growing swells and strengthening winds. The VHF radio crackled with urgent advisories, evacuation orders for the entire Maine coastline. Small craft warnings escalated to maritime emergencies. He should head back immediately, but that would mean running directly into the storm's path. The safer option now was to continue northeast, skirting the worst of the system, then loop back once it had passed. It would mean another day at sea at least, but the hold was already half full with premium catch. If when he made it back he'd have enough to make the next loan payment, keep the bank at bay a little longer. His phone showed a series of increasingly urgent texts from Michael, the last few in all caps. No signal now to respond, even if he knew what to say. Max whined loudly, more insistent than usual. When Raymond looked down, the dog was pawing at the floor, trying to get his attention. Through the rain-streaked windows, Raymond spotted something in the water off the starboard bow, a flash of blue light like the one he'd glimpsed in the harbor, but larger, more sustained. It pulsed with a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate, a sequence repeating every few seconds. Not phosphorescence, not any natural phenomenon he recognized from 40 years at sea. The radio crackled again, but instead of the expected weather update, it emitted a series of tones, low, high, middle, pause, repeat. The pattern matched the pulsing light perfectly. Max barked at the sound, ears perked forward, tail stiff. Raymond cut the engine, letting the Sea Whisper drift. The blue light grew brighter as the vessel approached it, or perhaps as it approached the vessel. There was intentionality in its movement, purpose in its pulsing. A cold certainty settled in Raymond's gut. This was no natural occurrence, no coincidence of storm and sea. The light circled the boat once, then shot ahead, a beacon leading into the gathering storm. Max pawed at the wheelhouse door, whining to be let out onto the deck. Against every maritime instinct, Raymond found himself restarting the engine following the light. It seemed to promise something: safety discovery, answers to questions he hadn't thought to ask. For 2 hours they followed the Sea Whisper, pitching in growing seas, the blue light always just ahead, leading them into a section of coastline Raymond knew only from charts, a rugged, uninhabited stretch 20 miles north of Harborside, riddled with hidden reefs and treacherous currents. No sane captain would approach it in good weather, let alone in the outer bands of a hurricane. Yet the light led confidently, finding channels where there should be none, opening passages between reefs that appeared on no chart. Raymond's rational mind screamed warnings, but some older instinct, some sailor's sixth sense, told him to trust this impossible guide. As they entered a hidden cove sheltered by towering granite cliffs, the storm seemed to recede. Here, improbably, the waters were calm, protected by the natural breakwater of the cliffs. The blue light hovered at the center of the cove, then slowly descended beneath the surface. Raymond dropped anchor in 30 feet of water, the depth finder showing a sandy bottom safe for mooring. The rain had stopped within the cove's microclimate, though he could see it falling in sheets just beyond the cliff walls. They had found impossible shelter in the heart of a hurricane. Max paced the deck, agitated, focused on the spot where the light had vanished. Raymond joined him, peering into waters that should have been dark, but were instead illuminated from below, a soft blue glow spreading outward from some unseen source. Through the glowing water, a shape began to emerge, massive, curved, metallic. At first, Raymond thought it might be the hull of a sunken vessel, but as more became visible, he realized this was unlike any ship he'd ever seen. The form was almost organic, like a giant shell or carapace, but clearly manufactured with seams and panels visible along its surface. As the storm raged beyond their protected cove, the tide began to recede dramatically, an extreme low, tied to the hurricane's pressure system. The water level dropped rapidly, revealing more of the mysterious object with each passing minute. Max barked excitedly, running back and forth along the rail, his attention fixed on the emerging form. By nightfall, with the storm reaching its peak beyond the cliffs, the object was fully exposed, a massive oval structure, perhaps 70 feet long and 30 feet wide, its surface a dull metallic blue-gray, encrusted with decades of marine growth. It rested on the sandy bottom like a sleeping leviathan, half buried but unmistakably artificial. Raymond launched the Sea Whisper's small, inflatable tender, his curiosity overwhelming caution. With Max whining protest from the larger vessel, he motored across to the exposed object, circling it once before approaching. Up close, the construction was even more impressive: seamless panels, fitted with precision that spoke of advanced engineering, the entire form hydrodynamically perfect. Near what appeared to be the front of the object, Raymond spotted markings, English letters, and numbers partially obscured by barnacles and corrosion. He scraped away the growth with his pocket knife, revealing words that sent a chill through him despite the warm summer air. Property of U.S. Navy, and beneath it, Project Poseidon, classified. A military vessel then, but unlike any he'd ever heard of. No conning tower like a submarine, no propulsion system he could identify. Its shape reminded him of the deep-sea submersibles he'd seen in documentaries, but far larger and more sophisticated than anything publicly acknowledged. As Raymond continued his examination, his light revealed a seam running the length of the object, not a damage crack, but a deliberate division like a hatch or opening mechanism. At the widest part of the oval, the seam widened slightly enough to see that it continued inward. This wasn't just a shell, it contained an interior. The storm's wind carried the sound of barking. Max was growing increasingly agitated aboard the Sea Whisper, standing at the rail and fixing his gaze not on Raymond, but on something behind him. Raymond turned to find an old man standing at the edge of the newly exposed beach, watching him with unnerving steadiness. Even from 50 yards away, there was something familiar about the figure, weathered-faced sailor's stance, the assessing gaze of someone who had spent a lifetime reading waters and skies. The old man beckoned once, then turned to walk along the narrow strip of beach toward a path cut into the cliff face. Raymond hesitated, looking back at the mysterious object, then to his dog, still barking urgently from the Sea Whisper. Curiosity won. He guided the tender to shore, securing it above the tide line before following in the old man's footsteps. The path wound upward through granite formations, occasionally offering glimpses of the protected cove where his vessel rode at anchor beside the exposed mystery. At the cliff top, the full fury of the hurricane became apparent again, trees bent nearly horizontal in the wind, rain falling in sheets across the landscape. Yet here, too, was a protected pocket, a small cabin nestled in a natural depression, its windows glowing with warm light. The old man stood in the open doorway, watching Raymond's approach with the patience of someone who had expected this meeting for a very long time. Up close, his age was difficult to determine. Somewhere beyond 70, his face tanned to leather by sun and wind, white hair pulled back in a sailor's ponytail, eyes the pale blue of deep water ice. The cabin's interior was Spartanly functional: a wood stove, a narrow bunk shelves lined with books and nautical instruments. But one entire wall was devoted to what could only be called a shrine to the object in the cove photographs, showing it in various stages of construction, technical drawings, newspaper clippings, yellowed with age, and a framed black and white photograph of three men in naval uniforms standing proudly before a scale model of the same oval vessel. Raymond's eyes fixed on a name badge visible in the photograph, Blackwood M., the old man's identity slotting into place with the certainty of a ship finding harbor. "You're Martin Blackwood." The old man nodded once, gesturing Raymond to a chair beside the wood stove. "Been waiting for someone to find it. Knew the storm might uncover it. Didn't expect it'd be you specifically." Raymond remained standing, processing what he was seeing. "What is that thing down there?" Martin's weathered face remained impassive. "Navy called it the Poseidon prototype. Deep-sea exploration vessel officially." Reality was more complicated. On the wall behind Martin, Raymond noticed navigational charts of the cove showing depth changes. Over decades, the object had been intentionally positioned, then gradually buried by natural sand movement and deliberate camouflage efforts. A framed newspaper headline caught Raymond's eye. "3 Navy scientists missing at sea. Research vessel lost in unexplained incident." The date, June 17, 1962. Martin followed his gaze. "My grandfather was chief engineer on the project. Naval Research Laboratory. Brilliant man. Disappeared along with the vessel and the other 2 lead scientists. Navy said it was an accident during a storm. Classified everything buried the whole program." His voice carried the weight of a story long held close. "Official record says they all died. The truth is more complicated." Raymond's maritime instincts prickled with warning. This man knew too much, had been waiting too precisely. "How are you involved in this?" Martin moved to the wall of documents, tapping a finger on a faded photograph of a young sailor. "Served on the support vessel. Youngest crewman. Only one who knew what my grandfather was really working on." only one who knew where to look when they disappeared. Outside, the hurricane reached new intensity when, howling around the protected depression where the cabin stood. Martin seemed not to notice, lost in memories decades old. They weren't building a research vessel. They were building something that could survive pressure at any depth indefinitely, something that could become part of the ocean itself. Raymond thought of the blue light that had guided him to this hidden cove, impossible in its precision and purpose. What exactly is down there, Mr. Blackwood? Martin's eyes refocused on Raymond, assessing something only he could see. Project Poseidon was officially about creating a deep-sea exploration vehicle. Unofficially, it was about creating a permanent human presence in the deep ocean. A symbiotic system, part machine, part man, part ocean. He paused, watching for Raymond's reaction. They succeeded. The claim should have sounded delusional, yet Raymond found himself thinking of the pulsing blue light, the precision of its guidance through treacherous waters, the way Max had responded to it. He thought of his dream voices calling from the deep, something ancient stirring. Martin continued, his voice lowering. My grandfather and the others, they discovered something about the ocean, that it has a kind of consciousness, a memory. They built Poseidon not just to explore it, but to communicate with it. At the end, they made a choice to become part of it. Raymond shook his head, rational mind reasserting itself. That's impossible. No human could survive 60 years underwater. Martin's smile held no humor. No ordinary human, no. But they weren't ordinary anymore by the end. The Navy wanted a weapon, a way to control the seas. My grandfather and his colleagues created something else, a guardian, a translator between humanity and the ocean. He tapped another photograph, this one showing a strange mechanical suit, humanoid, but clearly designed for underwater pressure. The Poseidon interface, one part of the system. The shell down there is the other. Together, they were meant to create a new kind of being. The wind shifted outside, bringing the sound of frantic barking. Max was no longer aboard the Sea Whisper. Somehow impossibly, the dog's barking came from the direction of the exposed object in the cove below. Raymond moved to the cabin's window. Through sheets of rain, he could see the exposed oval on the cove floor, now illuminated by spotlights from his vessel. A small figure moved around it. Max, somehow having made it ashore, was circling the object, stopping occasionally to paw at its surface or bark at its sealed seam. Martin joined him at the window, unsurprised. Animals sense it better than we do. The presence is sigh. Raymond turned to the old man, patience exhausted. Inside, you're telling me there's someone alive in there after 60 years? Martin's expression didn't change. Not alive the way you're thinking, but present, aware, waiting. He pointed to the dates on various documents pinned to the wall, periodic notations spanning decades. It surfaces every 20 years or so, just long enough to be seen by someone, then disappears again. Not by accident, by design. Raymond thought of the impossible blue light, its deliberate path leading him to safety. Why now? Why here? Martin's gaze was piercing. The ocean is changing, warming, rising, acidifying, dying in some places. The Guardians are stirring because they sense the threat. Your dog senses it too. He nodded toward Max, still circling the object below. They're waking up, Mr. Foster. Not just this one. Others like it placed in oceans around the world. A chill ran through Raymond that had nothing to do with the storm. Others, how many? Martin turned away, moving to a chest in the corner of the cabin. 7 that I know of for certain. Possibly more. He unlocked the chest with a key hung around his neck, revealing stacks of folders and notebooks. My grandfather left me everything, his notes, his fears, his hopes for what they were creating. He selected one folder, holding it out to Raymond. You should see this. You've been chosen somehow, though I don't yet understand why. Raymond hesitated, then took the folder. Inside were technical diagrams of the oval vessel, handwritten notes in faded ink, and photographs of interior compartments, sleek, containing equipment far advanced even by modern standards. But what drew his eye was a detailed schematic of what appeared to be a human figure encased in a mechanical suit, connected to the vessel's systems by dozens of interfaces. Notes in the margin read, S has volunteered. Integration process begins tomorrow. God help us if we've miscalculated. Before Raymond could ask the obvious question, A high-pitched sound cut through the storm noise, a keening metallic groan from the direction of the cove. Both men turned to the window. Below, Max had stopped circling and stood rigid facing the oval vessel as the massive seam along its center began to widen, a sliver of blue light escaping from within. Martin's face showed no surprise, only a solemn recognition. It's starting. After all these years, it's finally starting. The seam widened further, the blue light intensifying, reflecting off the cove's sheltered waters. Max backed away several steps, but didn't flee, his posture alert rather than frightened. Raymond was already moving toward the door. My dog, Martin caught his arm with surprising strength for his age. Wait, there's more you need to know before you go down there. His eyes held a warning. You're not the only one who's been looking for Poseidon. There are others, government, private interests, who've been searching for decades. Your developer friend Harrington is working with them. Raymond pulled free. Harrington. What does he have to do with this? Martin's expression darkened. His harbor development is a cover. His real employers want what's inside that vessel, the technology, the knowledge. They've known something was in these waters for years but couldn't pinpoint it. The storm finally revealed what they've been searching for. As if in confirmation, a new sound reached them, the distant but unmistakable thrum of helicopter rotors, somehow audible, even through the hurricane winds. Martin moved quickly to a shortwave radio in the corner, adjusting dials until a burst of static resolved into voices. Coordinates confirmed, asset exposed by storm surge. Local operative reports civilian vessel at location. Proceed with extraction once weather permits. Priority Alpha. Raymond recognized the clinical precision of military communications. Martin switched off the radio, his expression grim. Your arrival wasn't random, Mr. Foster. The Guardian chose you, guided you here because it sensed what was coming. It needs protection now while it's vulnerable. Another mechanical groan echoed from below, louder this time. The seam had opened further, a gap now visible even from the cliff-top vantage point. Blue light poured from the opening, illuminating the cove with an unearthly glow. Max had moved closer again, nose to the ground, tracking something invisible to human eyes. Martin pressed a small object into Raymond's hand, a metal cylinder cool to the touch, inscribed with the same markings as the vessel. My grandfather left this with instructions. Said it contains everything someone would need to understand if the time came. His eyes held Raymond's with fierce intensity. The ocean chose you, Mr. Foster. Don't know why. Don't know what you're supposed to do. But I've been waiting 60 years to find out. Raymond stared at the cylinder, then at the spectacle unfolding below. The blue light now pulsed in a distinct pattern, matching the sequence he'd followed through the storm. Max had reached the opening in the vessel and stood before it, head lowered as if in communication with whatever lay within. The helicopter sounds grew louder despite the storm impossibly flying in hurricane conditions. Whoever was coming had resources and determination beyond normal limits. Raymond pocketed the cylinder and headed for the door. 60 years of secrets, a dog somehow communing with an impossible machine, storm-defying pursuers converging. None of it made sense, yet all of it felt strangely inevitable, as if he'd been moving toward this moment his entire life without knowing it. Martin's voice followed him into the howling wind. The ocean remembers everything it's taken, Mr. Foster. Sometimes, rarely, it gives something back. Raymond descended the cliff path at a near run, sliding and stumbling on rain-slick rocks. The protected cove below had transformed. The water now glowed electric blue from whatever light poured from the vessel, creating an otherworldly scene amid the raging storm beyond the cliffs. Max still stood before the opening, which had widened to perhaps 3 feet large enough for a man to enter. As Raymond approached, the dog turned to him, eyes reflecting the strange light, then looked back at the gap as if making an introduction between two parties. Raymond reached the vessel's side, placing one hand on its metallic surface. It hummed beneath his palm, vibrations pulsing in time with the light. The opening beckoned, revealing glimpses of an interior preserved in pristine condition, despite decades underwater control panels with lights still active, seats designed for human occupants, and at the center a chamber containing what appeared to be a suit of articulated metal, humanoid in shape, but adapted for deep-sea conditions. Instinct told him to back away, to return to his vessel and flee before the approaching forces arrived. But Max whined urgently, pawing at the opening's edge. The cylinder in Raymond's pocket seemed suddenly heavier, its importance clearer. From inside the vessel came a sound not mechanical this time, but almost vocal, a modulated tone that rose and fell like speech without words. It resonated not just in Raymond's ears, but somehow within his chest, a vibration that seemed to match his heartbeat for a moment before accelerating it. The dog responded with a bark, then looked expectantly at Raymond. The message couldn't have been clearer if Max had spoken aloud. "We need to help whatever is in there." Raymond hesitated at the threshold of discovery, 60 years of secrets waiting just inside. Behind him, the helicopter sound grew ever closer, somehow navigating the impossible winds of the hurricane. Before him, something that defied explanation beckoned with pulsing light and resonant tones. He thought of Michael's text message, of Harrington's smug certainty, of Martin's decades of patient waiting. He thought of Clara's words about the ocean always taking more than it gives. Perhaps this was the moment when that ledger might finally balance. With Max at his side, Raymond Foster stepped toward the light, toward whatever waited within the impossible vessel that the storm had revealed and the ocean had preserved. Some mysteries demand witnesses. Some calls must be answered, no matter how improbable their source. The gap in the vessel widened like the mouth of some ancient creature awakening from hibernation. As Raymond stepped through, the metal cylinder in his pocket grew warm against his thigh. Max pressed close against his leg, the dog's usual confidence tempered by an uncharacteristic wariness. The interior space defied expectations larger than seemed possible from outside, with surfaces that gleamed as if never touched by corrosion or time. Panels illuminated as they passed, responding to their presence with soft blue phosphorescence. The chamber narrowed into a corridor that curved gently downward, leading deeper into the craft. No dust, no sediment, no sign that 60 years had passed since human hands had touched these controls. The air carried a metallic tang mixed with something else clean ozonic, like the atmosphere after lightning strikes. At the corridor's end, the passage opened into what could only be described as a command center. Curved screens embedded in the walls displayed data in formats Raymond couldn't comprehend, not just text and numbers, but pulsing patterns of light, shifting color gradients, symbols that seemed to transform even as he tried to focus on them. At the center stood an elevated platform containing a single chair, surrounded by controls and interface panels. Behind this command chair loomed something that made Raymond's breath catch, a human-shaped exoskeleton suspended in a transparent chamber. The suit was a masterpiece of engineering, articulated joints, and flexible metal panels, designed to mimic human movement while withstanding crushing oceanic pressures. A helmet with an opaque visor crowned the creation, its surface reflecting the blue light that permeated the vessel. Mac's wide eyes fixed not on the impressive technology, but on something protruding from the rear of the chamber, a cable or conduit extending from the suit into the vessel's wall, pulsing with the same blue luminescence that illuminated the room. The connection wasn't merely mechanical, something flowed through it, energy or information, or perhaps something beyond contemporary understanding. The metal cylinder in Raymond's pocket now thrummed insistently, vibrating against his thigh, in a pattern that matched the pulsing light. He extracted it, feeling its weight and warmth intensify as he approached the central platform. The cylinder's end cap displayed the same insignia as the vessel, Project Poseidon, and beneath it, a simple DNA-like spiral etched into the metal. When Raymond's thumb brushed the spiral, the cap retracted with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. From within, he withdrew a tightly rolled bundle of papers and a small data device of unfamiliar design. The papers were handwritten in a precise engineer's script, the ink still vivid despite its age. The first page bore a simple heading, "In the event of awakening Protocol Alpha." Raymond unrolled the documents on the nearest flat surface, revealing schematics, notes, and what appeared to be operating instructions. The handwriting matched the margin notes he'd seen in Martin's cabin doctor. Samuel Blackwood Martin's grandfather had left behind more than just a legacy of rumors and questions. He'd created a manual for whoever found his creation. The first paragraph struck Raymond like a physical blow. If you are reading this, then the Poseidon system has selected you as a potential communicator. The ocean speaks in rhythms and patterns indecipherable to conventional human perception. We built this vessel not to conquer the deep, but to understand it. The Navy believed they were funding a weapons platform. We delivered something far more significant, the first interface between humanity and the planet's true consciousness. As Raymond read the screens around him, shifted displaying images that corresponded to the text photographs of the three scientists, technical diagrams of the vessel's systems maps showing similar facilities positioned strategically in oceans around the world. The synchronization couldn't be coincidence. The vessel was responding to his attention, elaborating on the written record with stored data. Max circled the room, sniffing cautiously at various panels and components, occasionally returning to Raymond's side, as if to ensure his human companion remained safe. The dog's behavior had changed since entering the vessel, more deliberate, less reactive, almost as if he too were receiving information from some unseen source. The notes explained the project's evolution from military initiative to something far more profound. The three lead scientists, Blackwood, Sullivan, and Chen, had discovered patterns in deep ocean data that defied conventional explanation. Thermal flows, current movements, even marine animal migrations followed mathematical sequences too complex and too precise to be random. The patterns suggested coordination, communication, perhaps even intention on a scale encompassing the entire global ocean system. Project Poseidon began as an attempt to study these patterns more directly by placing monitoring stations at key oceanic locations. But as the data accumulated, the scientists realized they weren't merely observing a natural phenomenon. They were detecting the slow, vast thoughts of a planetary consciousness expressed through the medium of water. The ocean, they concluded, was not just a collection of chemical compounds, but a living information system with its own form of awareness. The military sponsors naturally saw only strategic advantage. Control of ocean systems meant control of weather shipping, undersea resources. They funded the construction of 7 vessels, each designed to interface directly with oceanic consciousness at critical nodes around the world. What they didn't anticipate was how the experience would transform the scientists themselves. Raymond found photographs of the interface suits in various stages of development, with increasingly elaborate connections between human operator and vessel systems. The final design integrated biological monitoring systems, neural interfaces, and life support, capable of sustaining a human consciousness indefinitely, even as the physical body transformed to adapt to its new environment. A journal entry dated June 16, 1962, the day before the official disappearance, revealed the truth. Sullivan has completed full integration with the Poseidon prototype. His physical form remains recognizable, but his consciousness now exists partially within the vessel's systems and partially within the oceanic information network. He reports experiences beyond language, sensing temperature variations across thousands of miles, feeling the movement of currents as extensions of his own circulatory system, perceiving time at the pace of continental drift rather than human heartbeats. He is no longer entirely human, no longer entirely individual. He has become a node in a vaster awareness. The entry continued more urgently. The Navy has discovered our true purpose. They're sending security forces to seize the prototypes and documentation. Chen is destroying our research at the mainland facility. I will activate Protocol Alpha, the dispersal and concealment of all 7 vessels at predetermined coordinates. Sullivan, now integrated, will guide the Poseidon prototype to the main site. The others, with volunteer operators, will proceed to their designated locations. May those who find them in the future understand what we've sacrificed to preserve this discovery. A sudden change in the vessel's hum pulled Raymond from his reading. The screens flickered, then displayed a new image, a real-time radar scan showing a helicopter hovering just outside the protected cove battling the hurricane's outer bands. Even through the vessel's insulated hull, the aircraft's thrum was audible, the sound of technology forcing its way through nature's defenses. Max growled a low rumble unlike his usual bark. His attention fixed on the suspended interface suit, which had begun to pulse more rapidly with blue energy. The suit's visor, previously opaque, now displayed patterns of light that coalesced into what Raymond could only interpret as an expression of concern. A new screen activated, showing the exterior of the vessel from multiple angles. Martin Blackwood stood on the shore of the cove, looking directly into one of the cameras. The old man's face showed recognition. He knew he was being observed. He pointed urgently toward the approaching helicopter, then made a series of hand signals that Raymond couldn't interpret, but which clearly carried meaning for the vessel's systems. The screens responded, shifting to display schematics of underwater passages leading from the cove to the open ocean. The control chair at the center of the room illuminated, suggesting occupancy. Raymond approached cautiously, the papers and cylinder clutched in one hand. The chair rotated to face him, an invitation too deliberate to ignore. As he settled into it, interfaces extended to meet him, not invasively, but offering connection. Hand grips emerged from the armrests, a headrest adjusted to his height, foot controls positioned precisely for his reach. When his palms contacted the hand grips, information flooded his awareness, not as text or images, but as direct understanding. The vessel was communicating, translating concepts for his comprehension. He understood suddenly that the entity within the interface suit was indeed Dr. James Sullivan, but also no longer entirely him. 60 years of communion with the ocean had transformed the human consciousness into something hybrid, a translator between human thought and oceanic awareness. And now it was asking for Raymond's help. The approach of the helicopter wasn't coincidence. Someone had tracked the vessel's awakening, someone connected to the original project's military oversight, someone who saw in this technology not understanding but power. The vessel needed to return to deeper water before it could be captured or studied. But after decades of dormancy, its systems required human guidance to navigate the dangerous passage from the cove to open ocean. The headrest against Raymond's skull conveyed images, Harrington in conversation with men in suits, examining old Project Poseidon documents, a facility where similar technology was being developed for military applications. Surveillance equipment monitoring the main coastline for unusual oceanic phenomena. The developer's interest in Harborside wasn't about luxury condos, it was about establishing a base of operations to search for the lost Poseidon prototype. Max barked sharply, drawing Raymond's attention to the exterior screens. The helicopter had landed on a flat section of clifftop near Martin's cabin. Armed figures in black tactical gear deployed, moving with military precision despite the storm. One figure stood apart, directing operations from the helicopter's door, not in tactical gear, but in an expensive raincoat. Even through the grainy image and sheets of rain, Raymond recognized Marshal Harrington. Another figure emerged from the helicopter, this one in a specialized wetsuit. His equipment marked him as different from the tactical team, not military, but scientific carrying instruments rather than weapons. The man looked directly at one of the vessel's external cameras, as if aware of being watched, and Raymond felt a chill of recognition even before the vessel's systems identified him. Dr. Alan Parker, former Navy research director, now working for a private military contractor specializing in unconventional maritime technologies. Martin Blackwood was attempting to delay them, positioning himself between the team and the path down to the cove. The old man's stance was defiant despite his age, arms spread to physically block the narrow trail. The tactical team hesitated, looking to Harrington and Parker for instructions. Violence against an elderly civilian would complicate their mission, create witnesses, generate questions. The vessel communicated urgency through pulses of blue light and direct neural impression. Its message was clear: they had minutes, not hours, before the team found a way past Martin and reached the cove. Once here, they had equipment to secure the vessel, to transport it, to extract the secrets it contained, including the consciousness that had become one with its systems. Raymond felt the weight of decision press upon him. He could leave now, return to the sea, whisper, claim innocence when the team arrived. After all, what obligation did he have to this impossible machine and its transformed occupant? His life was complicated enough without becoming entangled in 6-decade-old government secrets and the ambitions of men like Parker and Harrington. But as he considered abandonment, Max placed his paws on the platform beside the command chair, eyes fixed on Raymond with an intelligence that seemed heightened by the vessel's environment. The dog had guided him here, had sensed something in this mysterious craft that Raymond was only beginning to comprehend. And now those eyes asked a simple question: would he turn away from something wondrous simply because it was dangerous? The papers in Raymond's hand carried the weight of scientific revolution, proof that the ocean itself possessed a form of consciousness, that communication between human and planetary awareness was possible, that transformation rather than exploitation might be the key to humanity's relationship with Earth's most powerful natural system. If Parker and his team seized the vessel, that knowledge would be weaponized, classified, hidden from a world that desperately needed new ways of understanding nature. Raymond engaged the command interfaces, feeling the vessel respond to his intention. Screens shifted to display navigation systems, power distribution networks, propulsion controls. The design was decades ahead of its time, yet somehow intuitive to his sailor's instincts. The path from cove to open water appeared as a three-dimensional map with danger points highlighted and alternative routes suggested based on tidal conditions and storm patterns. The vessel's outer hatch began to close, sealing them inside with a sound of precision, engineering engaging after decades of dormancy. External cameras showed the tactical team had pushed past Martin, who now lay on the ground injured or merely detained. Raymond couldn't tell. They were descending the cliff path rapidly, despite the treacherous conditions rappelling where the trail became too steep or narrow. Raymond initiated the vessel's propulsion system, feeling a vibration build beneath him as dormant engines awakened. The craft lifted from the sandy bottom with surprising buoyancy, hovering momentarily before beginning to move toward the cove's submerged exit. Max braced himself against the sudden motion, but showed no fear, only alert interest in their underwater journey. The storm that had trapped normal vessels in harbor actually aided their escape. The hurricane's massive wave action and swirling currents provided cover for the vessel's movement, making it nearly impossible to track from surface vessels or air support. The craft accelerated smoothly, navigating between reefs and underwater formations with precision that suggested both advanced technology and intimate knowledge of the seafloor's contours. They were a half-mile from the cove when Raymond noticed a new presence on the tactical display, small submersibles deploying from a larger vessel anchored offshore, moving to intercept. Parker had prepared for underwater pursuit, anticipating that the Poseidon prototype might attempt escape. The submersibles were fast, modern, armed with grappling systems designed to capture rather than destroy. Through the vessel's enhanced sensory systems, Raymond perceived the oceanic environment in ways his human senses never could: temperature gradients, current patterns, the electromagnetic signatures of both natural formations and human technology. He felt rather than saw the submersibles approach, their engines creating disturbance patterns in the water that registered as discordant notes in the ocean's natural rhythm. The interface suit in its chamber pulsed with increased energy, and Raymond felt a new presence in the command system: Sullivan, or what remained of him, joining the operation. Information flowed, faster options for evasion appearing on screens before Raymond could even formulate the questions. The vessel wasn't just responding to commands now, but anticipating needs, collaborating rather than merely obeying. They descended deeper, following a submarine canyon that cut through the continental shelf. At 300 feet, the pursuing submersibles began to show signs of strain. Their operational depth was being tested, while the Poseidon craft moved with increasing comfort and speed. At 500 feet, two of the three pursuers broke off, retreating to shallower water. The third continued the chase, pushing its engineering limits. At 800 feet, in the perpetual midnight of the deep ocean, the final submersible's hull integrity failed. Raymond watched through the vessel's sensors as the craft imploded, the pressure wave registering as both visual data and a somber vibration through the command system. No human crew, thankfully. The pursuer had been remotely operated, but the destruction still represented millions in technology reduced to debris on the abyssal plain. They continued deeper, the vessel's hull adapting to increasing pressure with subtle shifts in its molecular structure, another technological marvel decades ahead of its time. At 1,500 feet, they entered a thermal vent field unmapped by conventional oceanography, a maze of superheated water plumes and mineral chimneys perfect for concealment. The vessel slowed, positioning itself within a forest of vent structures. External cameras showed a primeval landscape: ghostly white tube worms, blind crabs, heat-loving bacteria forming mats across mineral formations. Life thriving in what should be an impossible environment, testament to adaptation and resilience. With immediate pursuit evaded, Raymond relaxed his grip on the controls. The mental link with the vessel's systems eased, allowing him to process what had just occurred. He had stolen a 60-year-old experimental craft from government agents, piloted it to the deep ocean floor, and was now effectively in hiding with whatever remained of Dr. James Sullivan's consciousness and his golden retriever. The absurdity of the situation struck him suddenly, a bubble of hysterical laughter rising in his throat. Max nudged his hand, sensing the emotional turbulence. The dog's steady presence, anchored Raymond, reminded him that regardless of the extraordinary circumstances, he wasn't alone in this experience. The animal's adaptation to their situation, calm acceptance of breathing air in a vessel 1,500 feet underwater, comfortable navigation of advanced technology, suggested that Max was perceiving aspects of the situation that Raymond couldn't yet understand. The vessel's screens reconfigured now, displaying what Raymond recognized as meteorological data, the hurricane's path intensity, and projected development. The storm was intensifying beyond predictions, its circular structure tightening around an eye that had formed directly over Harborside Cove. Such rapid organization was meteorologically improbable, suggesting forces beyond normal weather patterns were at work. A new screen activated, displaying a satellite view of the main coastline. 7 distinct thermal anomalies appeared along the shoreline, each pulsing with the same rhythm as the light within the vessel. The pattern extended outward, influencing ocean currents, temperature gradients, even cloud formations. The Poseidon prototype wasn't just responding to the storm, it was communicating with it, perhaps even influencing its development. Raymond's attention was drawn to a flashing alert on another screen, a communication attempt originating from the surface. Audio only transmitting on frequencies the military hadn't used in decades, yet the vessel's systems recognized the protocol instantly. After a moment's hesitation, Raymond accepted the transmission. Martin Blackwood's voice emerged from hidden speakers, strained but determined. Poseidon, actual, this is Lighthouse. Confirm status. The old man was using call signs established 60 years ago, protocols he must have memorized from his grandfather's records. Raymond searched the interface for response controls, finding them integrated into the command chair. Lighthouse, this is... He hesitated, unsure what to call himself, then settled on simplicity. Foster, we're secure at depth. What's your situation? Martin's reply came through static, the storm interfering with transmission. They're setting up a containment perimeter. Parker's calling in resources research vessel deep sea recovery equipment. They know the prototype is active. A pause filled with the sound of wind. They have questions about you, how you found it, why it responded. Raymond glanced at the interface suit still pulsing with blue energy. I don't have those answers myself. You will. Martin's confidence came through despite the interference. My grandfather's notes indicate the selection process is deliberate, not random. The system chose you for a reason, Foster. Another pause longer this time. They've taken your boat in for safety inspection. They're also looking for your son. Michael. Raymond's stomach tightened. His son knew nothing about any of this, yet would now be drawn into the expanding circle of consequences. Why Michael? Leverage. Martin's tone hardened. Parker operates through Horizon Group, technically private sector, but with deep government connections. They want the technology intact, which means they need your cooperation. Family makes effective motivation. Raymond's mind raced. Michael was due in Harborside tomorrow. If Parker's people intercepted him, can you warn him? Already tried. Cell networks are down, storm damage. Landlines too. Martin's voice dropped lower. But I called in some old favors. Coast Guard will delay any non-essential traffic into the area, including buses from Boston. Buys us some time. The external cameras suddenly activated, scanning the water around them. Something was approaching, not a submersible this time, but a living organism, massive and deliberate in its movement. The thermal signature identified it as a whale, specifically a humpback, unusual for this depth and location. More unusual was its behavior. It circled the vessel once, then maintained position directly above them, as if standing guard. The interface suit's pulsing changed rhythm, and Raymond felt, rather than heard, a response from the vessel's systems. Some form of communication was occurring, not through sound but through electromagnetic patterns. The whale descended closer, its enormous eye visible through the external cameras studying the vessel with unmistakable intelligence. Martin's voice returned through the static. There's something else you need to know. The Poseidon system wasn't just an isolated project. It was part of something called Deep Guardian, a contingency protocol for oceanic defense. His tone carried decades of kept secrets. My grandfather believed the ocean itself activated the system in response to threat. The 7 vessels were placed as network nodes designed to coordinate, if ever awakened, simultaneously. Raymond watched as the whale continued its inspection. What kind of threat are we talking about? In the 60s, they were thinking nuclear contamination, maybe Soviet deep-sea operations. Martin coughed, the sound rattling through the speakers. Now, ocean acidification, temperature rise, microplastics, dead zones from agricultural runoff. The oceans are dying by degrees, Foster. Maybe they've reached some tipping point we can't perceive, but they can. The whale departed as suddenly as it had appeared, accelerating toward the surface with powerful strokes of its massive tail. The vessel's tracking system followed its ascent, noting its course directly toward harborside. Martin continued, urgency building in his voice. Parker has his own theory. He thinks the system is preparing some kind of response to human activity, not just monitoring but intervention. That's why Horizon wants control. They see it as a potential weapon or threat, something to be neutralized or controlled. Raymond studied the environmental data still displayed on the surrounding screens. The patterns were undeniable: ocean currents, shifting in coordinated ways, thermal gradients, reorganizing, even deep water chemistry, showing synchronous changes across thousands of miles. Either the most improbable set of coincidences in oceanographic history or evidence of coordinated action on a planetary scale. The metal cylinder Martin had given him pulsed against the command chair, reminding Raymond of its contents. He returned to the documents, focusing now on sections he'd skimmed earlier. Technical specifications gave way to philosophical reflections, Blackwood's private thoughts on what they had discovered and created. The ocean does not think as we do, one passage read. Its consciousness operates on timescales of centuries across spatial dimensions, measured in continental shelves rather than neural pathways. Yet it perceives, it remembers, it adapts. And now through Sullivan's integration, it begins to understand us as we begin to understand it. This is not merely scientific breakthrough. It is the first contact with a non-human intelligence that has shared our planet since before our species existed. A final notation added in shakier handwriting caught Raymond's attention. Sullivan reports dreams now, not human dreams, but vast, slow thoughts from the deep. He says the ocean is concerned. It has witnessed our evolution from shoreline scavengers to atomic age destroyers. It has absorbed our wastes, our weapons tests, our oil spills, our heedless exploitation. It has been patient beyond human comprehension. But that patience is not infinite. The communication system crackled again, but this time it wasn't Martin's voice that emerged. A new speaker, clinical and precise. Poseidon prototype, this is Dr. Alan Parker of Horizon Group. We know you can hear us. We're prepared to discuss terms for your voluntary return to federal custody. Raymond hesitated, looking to the interface suit for guidance. The blue pulsing intensified, and one of the screens displayed a simple message. Caution, deception probable. Parker continued, his tone modulated to project reasonableness. The technology you've accessed is government property developed with taxpayer funds. More importantly, it may pose significant risks if mishandled. We're offering amnesty in exchange for your cooperation. No charges filed, your fishing business protected, your son's safety guaranteed. Boing. The mention of Michael wasn't subtle, a reminder that Parker had leverage and was prepared to use it. Raymond felt anger rise not just at the threat, but at the casual certainty with which it was delivered. Men like Parker and Harrington had always operated this way, treating lives and livelihoods as game pieces to be moved or sacrificed. The vessel's systems offered communication options, including voice distortion, to mask Raymond's identity. He engaged it before responding. The technology seems to have its own opinions about federal custody, Doctor. Maybe you should ask why it's been hiding from you for 60 years. Parker's response came quickly, a hint of frustration breaking through the professional veneer. We're not playing games, Mr. Foster. We have assets converging on your son's location in Boston. We have your vessel impounded. We have the legal authority to declare this an issue of national security. Cooperation now means leniency. Resistance means escalation. Raymond glanced at Max, who sat alert beside the command chair, ears forward, as he listened to the exchange. The dog's steady presence helped center him, reminding him that, regardless of extraordinary circumstances, core principles remained unchanged. He wouldn't be threatened, wouldn't be leveraged, especially not through his family. Here's a counter-proposal, Raymond replied, feeling a confidence that surprised him. You back off, you leave my son alone, you return my boat. Then maybe, just maybe, I'll consider sharing what I've learned about what you're really dealing with. Parker's laugh held no humor. You've been in that vessel for less than 3 hours, Mr. Foster. We've been studying this technology for decades. Whatever you think you've discovered, I assure you we already know. The interface suit pulsed, and one of the screens displayed another message. False statement detected. Alongside it appeared documentation from Horizon Group's own files, pages of frustrated research notes, failed attempts to replicate the Poseidon technology theoretical models that missed fundamental principles behind the system's operation. Raymond felt a surge of realization. The vessel had access to Horizon's databases, could monitor their communications, perhaps even their internal networks. Sullivan's consciousness, integrated with both machine and ocean, had capabilities far beyond conventional espionage or hacking. He was witnessing not just advanced technology, but a new form of intelligence, neither fully human nor fully artificial, operating with access to information systems worldwide. "I don't think you do know, Doctor." Raymond found himself speaking with the calm certainty of someone holding the stronger position. "I think you have fragments and theories, but the core truths have escaped you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be trying to capture this vessel. You'd have built your own by now." The silence that followed confirmed his assessment. When Parker spoke again, the reasonable tone had vanished. "You have 24 hours to reconsider, Foster. After that, we stop asking nicely." The communication cut abruptly, leaving only the ambient hum of the vessel's systems. Max nudged Raymond's hand, then moved toward a previously inactive section of the command center. A panel slid open as the dog approached, revealing what appeared to be a medical station, diagnostic equipment, and treatment systems far more advanced than anything in contemporary hospitals. The dog looked back at Raymond, then pointedly at the station, communicating as clearly as if he'd spoken, "You need this." Raymond hadn't registered the physical toll of the past hours, the stress of the storm, the shock of discovery, the mental exertion of operating unfamiliar technology. Now that Max had drawn attention to it, he felt the fatigue, the dehydration, the strain of muscles held too long in tension. He moved to the station where a diagnostic scan activated automatically. Results appeared on a small screen: elevated cortisol, mild dehydration, fatigue toxins accumulating in muscle tissue. A dispensing port offered a personalized hydration solution and what appeared to be some form of medical treatment delivered as a fine mist. Raymond hesitated, then accepted both, trusting that if the vessel had wanted to harm him, it had already had ample opportunity. The effect was remarkable clarity, returning to his thoughts, physical discomfort, fading energy levels, stabilizing. Not a stimulant high, but a balanced restoration, as if the vessel had precisely identified and addressed his body's specific needs. Max received similar treatment, a fine mist designed for canine physiology that the dog accepted with surprising compliance. Restored, Raymond returned to the command chair to assess their situation. The storm continued to intensify above now, a Category 4 hurricane with an eye directly over Harborside. Coastal evacuations were underway, though the suddenness of the storm's organization meant many residents were still in harm's way. Among the vessel's many screens, one monitored emergency services communications, fire departments, police, Coast Guard, all scrambling to respond. A private channel activated suddenly. Martin again, his voice tighter than before. "Foster, we have complications. Parker's people just intercepted someone they think is your son getting off a bus in Portland. They're bringing him to their temporary base at Harrington's development office." Raymond's restored clarity shattered. "That's not possible. Michael isn't due until tomorrow." "Apparently he decided to come early, left a message on your home answering machine." Martin paused, the sound of shuffling paper coming through the spunker. "There's more. Parker's research vessel is deploying some kind of acoustic technology, targeted low-frequency active sonar, military grade, designed to locate submarines or anything else hiding in deep water." As if confirming the warning, the vessel's sensors registered the first ping, a powerful sound wave propagating through the water, bouncing off solid objects and returning to its source. Conventional submarines could hide from such detection through special hull designs and acoustic dampening, but the Poseidon prototype, despite its advanced technology, hadn't been designed with modern counter-sonar measures. Raymond studied the tactical displays. The research vessel, actually a repurposed Navy auxiliary ship, was establishing a search grid centered on their last known position. With enough pings and computer analysis, they would eventually locate the prototype, no matter how deep it hid or how clever its positioning among the thermal vents. The interface suit pulsed more rapidly, the blue light taking on a subtly different hue. Around them, the vessel's systems responded, power allocations, shifting, dormant capabilities coming online. A new screen activated, displaying what appeared to be biological data, not human or conventional marine life, but something else entirely. Distributed neural networks, electromagnetic field generators, coordinated biological systems operating in concert across vast distances. Raymond struggled to interpret what he was seeing until a translation appeared: cetacean communication network, active nodes. The displays showed dozens of whales, humpbacks, blue sperm whales, even orcas, moving in coordinated patterns across the North Atlantic. Each animal's position was marked along with directional indicators showing convergence toward the main coastline. The interface suit's visor cleared partially, allowing Raymond to see what lay behind it for the first time. Not a human face, not anymore, but something that retained human features while incorporating elements of the vessel's technology. Eyes still recognizable as once human observed him with quiet intelligence, testing without judgment. A communication method activated not speech, not text, but direct concept transfer impressions, forming in Raymond's mind as clearly as if they had been spoken aloud. Sullivan, or the entity that had once been Sullivan, was explaining what was happening. The oceanic consciousness had been monitoring human activity for centuries, largely content to observe rather than intervene. But recent decades had brought changes too rapid and too damaging to ignore. Warming waters, chemical contamination, destruction of coral systems, industrial fishing, depleting entire species. The Poseidon Network was a contingency created to allow communication if intervention ever became necessary. That time had come. The ocean was mobilizing its most intelligent inhabitants, the cetaceans, as part of a coordinated response. Not an attack, not revenge, but a demonstration of awareness and capability intended to shock humanity into recognition of the sea as a conscious entity deserving of consideration and protection. The hurricane intensifying over Harborside wasn't merely a storm. It was a message precisely controlled, powerful enough to demand attention, but calibrated to minimize human casualties. Similarly, the convergence of whales represented a show of coordination impossible in conventional understanding of marine biology. Together, they formed the first clear communication from ocean to humanity. We are here. We are aware. We will no longer be passive victims of your thoughtlessness. Raymond processed this revelation with growing amazement. The scientists of Project Poseidon hadn't merely created an advanced submarine or communication system, they had established first contact with a non-human intelligence that had existed alongside humanity throughout history. Sullivan and his colleagues had recognized what they'd discovered and chosen integration rather than exploitation, becoming translators between human and oceanic consciousness. The vessel shuddered suddenly as another sonar ping struck with greater precision. The tactical display showed the research vessel narrowing its search grid, zeroing in on their location. They had minutes, perhaps less, before being precisely located. Once found, Horizon would deploy specialized equipment to capture the prototype equipment designed based on decades of studying the original Project Poseidon documents. Max barked sharply, drawing Raymond's attention to another screen, this one showing Michael Foster being escorted into Harrington's development office by two men in plain clothes but with military bearing. His son looked confused and angry, checking his phone repeatedly, likely trying to reach his father without success. The cellular network disruption caused by the storm had been precisely timed to prevent communication. Raymond faced an impossible choice: remain hidden with the prototype protecting its secrets, an integrated consciousness at the cost of abandoning his son to Parker's coercion or surface, and surrender protecting Michael, but delivering a planetary intelligence's first contact protocol into the hands of those who saw it only as a weapon or threat to be controlled. The interface suit pulsed, and Sullivan's consciousness communicated again, not direction but context, expanding Raymond's understanding of what was truly at stake. The oceanic response had already begun. Within hours, coordinated cetacean behavior would be visible worldwide. Within days, oceanic current patterns would shift in ways impossible to dismiss as natural variation. Within weeks, coastal weather systems would demonstrate precision and intentionality that no meteorological model could explain. Humanity would face irrefutable evidence of non-human intelligence operating on a planetary scale. How that revelation was managed, whether as cause for fear and militarization or opportunity for expanded understanding and cooperation, would shape the relationship between species for centuries to come. The Poseidon prototype and its occupant represented the crucial link, the translator between fundamentally different forms of consciousness. Another sonar ping struck closer still. On the tactical display, launch signatures appeared. The research vessel was deploying underwater drones, autonomous hunters designed to attach tracking devices to submarines. Once tagged, the prototype would be impossible to hide, its every movement monitored until Horizon could bring sufficient resources to capture it. Raymond looked to Max, who sat alert beside the command chair, then to the interface suit where Sullivan's transformed consciousness waited. The dog's steady presence and the scientist's patient awareness offered contrasting perspectives, one rooted in immediate loyalty and simple truths, the other expanded beyond human limitations into cosmic patience and planetary awareness. Martin's voice crackled through the communication system, once more strained and rushed. "Foster, they've triangulated your position. Recovery team is launching. You have to move now." Raymond's hands tightened on the command interfaces. The path forward wasn't clear, but the stakes were becoming increasingly apparent. His son, his community, and intelligence older than humanity itself, all converging around decisions he would make in the next few moments. The ocean had chosen him for reasons he still didn't understand. That choice now carried weight beyond anything he had imagined possible when he'd set out to sea before the storm. The hurricane eye rotated directly above Harborside, a perfect circle of calm, surrounded by destructive winds, too perfect, too precise to be natural. Beneath it, the waters of the harbor had begun to move in equally unnatural patterns, forming shapes and symmetries, visible even through the storm-tossed surface. The demonstration had begun, the message being written in wind and water for those with eyes to see. Whether humanity would receive that message with wisdom or fear depended partly on what Raymond Foster did next. The fisherman, whose world had been defined by bank notices and dwindling catches, now found himself at the confluence of forces beyond conventional understanding, faced with choices that would ripple outward through time in ways he could barely comprehend. Max placed a paw on Raymond's knee, the gesture grounding him in the midst of cosmic considerations. The path forward began to crystallize, not a perfect solution, but a direction true to both his responsibilities and the larger truths he'd discovered. The vessel's systems responded to his decision, power allocations shifting as new course options appeared on navigation displays. They would surface not in surrender but in deliberate revelation, not to Horizon's research vessel, but in Harborside Harbor itself, at the center of the hurricane's eye, visible to all who remained in the evacuated town. They would demonstrate the truth in a way neither Parker nor Harrington could control or conceal, initiating first contact on terms shaped by transparency rather than military classification. As Raymond engaged the propulsion system setting course for Harborside, the interface suit pulsed with what he now recognized as approval. Sullivan's consciousness, ancient and patient, after 60 years of communion with the ocean, had perhaps anticipated this moment when a simple fisherman chosen for reasons still unrevealed would make a decision based not on power or control, but on the recognition of truth's fundamental value. The vessel accelerated through the deep waters, sensors alert for pursuing drones' navigation systems, calculating the optimal approach to avoid detection until the final ascent. Max settled beside the command chair, calm and resolute, his earlier anxiety replaced by steady purpose. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, man and dog, ancient intelligence and modern consciousness, ocean and shore merging at the boundary where truth would finally surface. The storm-tossed waves receded slowly from Harborside's shattered shore, revealing a landscape transformed. Raymond Foster opened his eyes to find himself sprawled on a narrow strip of beach 2 miles south of the harbor, his clothes torn and crusted with salt. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest as he tried to move. The last thing he remembered was being swept from the Poseidon vessel's exterior deck when the hurricane eye wall closed in Michael's desperate reach, falling short as the sea claimed him. Something warm and wet pressed against his face. Max somehow still with him, the retriever's golden coat matted with seawater, but his eyes bright with unmistakable purpose. The dog barked once, nudging Raymond's shoulder insistently, then moved to stand at attention facing inland. Raymond followed the animal's gaze to see a trail of unusual markings in the sand. Not random storm debris, but deliberate patterns resembling the geometric symbols he'd seen within the Poseidon vessel. "You led me here," Raymond whispered, his voice raw from saltwater and exhaustion. Max's ears perked forward, his intelligence seemingly heightened in the aftermath of their encounter with oceanic consciousness. The dog had not merely survived the maelstrom, he had navigated it guided by something beyond normal animal awareness. Raymond struggled to his feet, taking inventory of his condition. No broken bones, though his left shoulder burned with each movement. The metal cylinder Martin had given him remained miraculously secure in his inside jacket pocket, protected from the sea's fury. His phone was destroyed, communications severed. The world beyond this strip of storm-ravaged shore might as well have been another planet. He oriented himself using landmarks barely visible through lingering mist. The lighthouse on Connors Point to the north, the distinctive shape of Breakwater Mountain to the west. Harborside lay beyond the next headland, its condition unknown after the hurricane's direct hit. Michael was there assuming he had survived along with the Wright Parker Harrington and whatever remained of the extraordinary vessel that had surfaced in their harbor. The sky above had cleared to an impossible blue, the storm's passage leaving preternatural stillness in its wake. But the ocean itself remained unsettled, its surface moving in patterns that defied normal wave action. Concentric circles forming and dissolving currents, flowing in geometric arrangements visible even from shore. The demonstration continued despite the hurricane's departure, the oceanic consciousness maintaining contact through direct manipulation of its physical medium. Max barked again more urgently, drawing Raymond's attention to something approaching from offshore. A sleek, dark shape cutting through the water with deliberate speed. Not a boat, but a living creature. A dolphin swimming alone and with obvious purpose. It stopped 30 yards offshore, lifted its head above the surface, and emitted a series of clicks and whistles that carried clearly across the water. Max responded with a single bark, as if acknowledging communication. The dolphin circled once, then departed with the same deliberate speed, leaving Raymond with the unsettling certainty that a message had been delivered and received, though not by him. Max trotted ahead along the shoreline, pausing occasionally to ensure Raymond followed, leading him toward Harborside with confident purpose. As they crested the headland an hour later, the full impact of the hurricane became visible. Harborside Harbor lay in ruins. Docks, splintered vessels tossed onto shore like discarded toys, buildings unroofed or collapsed entirely. Yet amid this devastation stood anomalous zones of perfect preservation. Structures completely untouched, despite standing adjacent to total destruction, as if the storm had consciously chosen its targets with surgical precision. Most notably, the harbor master's building remained pristine, its windows intact, radio antennas still vertical. Around it, a semicircle of undamaged ground extended precisely to the high water mark, beyond which chaos resumed. Similarly, the hospital and emergency services building stood untouched amid neighborhood devastation. The pattern was unmistakable. Critical infrastructure preserved while commercial development, particularly Harrington's waterfront properties, bore the storm's full fury. The harbor waters still moved in unnatural patterns, forming and reforming geometric shapes impossible under normal fluid dynamics. At the center where the Poseidon vessel had surfaced, a perfect circular calm persisted despite wind-driven chop elsewhere. Raymond couldn't see the vessel itself from this vantage point, but its influence remained evident in the water's impossible behavior. Military and emergency vehicles had established perimeter positions along the harbor's accessible sections. Uniformed personnel moved with practiced efficiency, establishing control points and communications equipment. These weren't standard National Guard or FEMA responders. Their unmarked black vehicles and specialized equipment marked them as something else entirely, likely Parker's Horizon Group contractors operating under emergency authorization. Raymond spotted a Coast Guard cutter maintaining position offshore, unusual sensor arrays mounted on its deck, scanning the harbor continuously. Further out, the silhouette of a larger vessel, military or research, he couldn't be certain, maintained station just beyond the horizon line. The response had escalated far beyond local emergency management, suggesting Parker had called in significant federal resources. A news helicopter circled overhead, maintaining careful distance from restricted airspace, but clearly documenting the scene below. Other media vessels remained offshore, prevented from approaching by Coast Guard interceptors. The attempted containment was both aggressive and conspicuously late. Whatever they hoped to control had already been witnessed, recorded, transmitted worldwide through countless smartphones before communications networks failed. Max tensed, suddenly hackles rising as he stared intently at a forest path leading inland from their position. Moments later, Martin Blackwood emerged from the underbrush, the old man's weathered face showing relief at their appearance. His right arm was secured in a makeshift sling, dried blood staining his sleeve, but he moved with surprising agility for his age. Thank God. The old man breathed genuine emotion, breaking through his usual reserve. Thought you were gone with the tide. They've been searching the coastline since the storm passed. Parker's people, not rescue services. Hunting, not helping. Raymond gestured toward the harbor. Michael Wright, Martin's expression tightened. Your son's alive, but not free. Parker's holding him at the emergency command center they've established in what's left of the harbor master's building, calling it protective custody while they debrief him about what happened on that vessel. The oceanographer, Wright, he disappeared during the storm. Some think she went down with the prototype, others say she was extracted by her university colleagues before the military cordon was established. Raymond absorbed this information, calculating options with a navigator's precision. The vessel, still in the harbor but changed. You need to see for yourself. Martin gestured for them to follow, leading them along a game trail that skirted Horizon's perimeter checkpoints. Parker's people are containing witnesses, confiscating recording devices, pushing the experimental military technology narrative hard, but they're fighting a losing battle against the evidence. They emerge from forest cover at an elevated position overlooking the harbor from the north opposite the development office where Raymond had last seen Michael. From this vantage point, the harbor's center came into clear view, and with it the transformed Poseidon vessel. The craft had opened like a mechanical flower, its previously sealed hull now extended into petal-like segments that floated perfectly on the water's surface. Each segment pulsed with the same blue luminescence Raymond had seen within the vessel's systems, creating patterns that matched the surrounding water's geometric movements. At the center where the interface suit had been housed, a column of blue light extended vertically into the air, occasionally shifting form, as if responding to unseen stimuli. It's been like that since the storm passed. Martin explained, his voice hushed with reluctant awe. Parker's people tried approaching with submersibles, but the water around it formed some kind of barrier. Perfect vortexes that push back anything that gets too close. They tried sonic weapons, two same ones they use against pirates, but the sound waves just disappeared, like the water absorbed them completely. Raymond studied the transformed vessel, recognition dawning. It's not a vessel anymore. It's become a node, a communication hub between oceanic consciousness and surface world. The patterns matched those Sullivan had shown him within the prototype systems, the signature of information exchange between fundamentally different forms of awareness. Martin nodded grimly. That's what has Parker terrified. He thought they were chasing classified technology, something they could control or at least understand. Instead, they've got direct evidence of non-human intelligence operating on planetary scale, demonstrating capabilities beyond anything in their theoretical models. Can't classify what's already been seen by hundreds, can't control what they don't understand. Movement at the harbor's entrance caught Raymond's attention. The distinctive spray of cetacean exhalation, not from a single whale but from many, their massive forms maintaining precise formation just beyond the harbor mouth. The dolphin he'd seen earlier moved between them like a messenger between larger forces. They've been gathering since dawn, Martin confirmed, following Raymond's gaze. Humpbacks, fins, even a few blues, species that never travel together now moving in coordinated patterns. Same things happening at harbor entrance and up and down the coast, according to emergency broadcasts. Commercial shipping worldwide is reporting unprecedented cetacean activity, all exhibiting the same coordinated behaviors. Max barked softly, drawing their attention to new movement at the harbor's edge. A figure in a specialized dive suit emerging from the water at a small cove beyond Horizon's perimeter. The figure removed its helmet, revealing Dr. Eleanor Wright, her silver-streaked hair plastered to her head, but her movements confident and purposeful. She carried equipment cases that suggested scientific rather than survival priority and moved with the urgency of someone bearing crucial information. Parker's been hunting her specifically, Martin explained as they watched Wright disappear into the forest. She managed to transmit data from inside the vessel before communications went down. Spectrographic analysis, fluid dynamics, measurements, audio recordings of whatever Sullivan communicated to you. Her university colleagues distributed it to scientific communities worldwide before Horizon could establish information control. Raymond made his decision. We need to reach her before Parker's people do. She's the scientific credibility this revelation needs. The witness who can translate what we experienced into terms the academic community will accept. They descended carefully, skirting Horizon's perimeter teams through forest paths Martin clearly knew intimately. The old man moved with the confident precision of someone who had spent decades mapping escape routes for exactly this scenario. The moment when the ocean's secret would finally surface and institutional forces would move to contain it. They found Wright in an abandoned fishing cabin a half-mile inland, hastily establishing satellite communications using equipment sophisticated enough to bypass normal networks. The oceanographer's intense focus broke momentarily when she registered their arrival, relief flashing across her features. Foster, you survived. Her voice carried genuine warmth beneath scientific precision. Sullivan's consciousness protected you somehow, guided you to shore through patterns even hurricane forces couldn't disrupt. Fascinating adaptation of hydrodynamic principles. Raymond gestured toward her equipment. What did you learn in there? What was Sullivan trying to communicate? Wright's expression shifted to something approaching reverence, mixed with scientific excitement. Everything we theorized about distributed consciousness in oceanic systems was dramatically understated. Sullivan didn't merely communicate with oceanic awareness. He became an integrated node within it, a translator, not just between languages, but between fundamentally different forms of consciousness. Her hands moved across specialized instruments, retrieving data with practiced efficiency. The Poseidon vessel wasn't just advanced technology. It was transitional architecture designed to accommodate human perception while facilitating integration with non-human awareness systems. Sullivan's transformation wasn't end goal, but proof of concept, demonstration that communication between species is possible despite profound differences in perceptual architecture. Max approached Wright cautiously, sniffing her equipment before sitting attentively beside her workspace. The oceanographer paused her rapid analysis to study the dog with professional curiosity. Your companion has been altered by exposure to oceanic communication systems, she observed. Canine neurological architecture lacks human filtering mechanisms. Direct perception, rather than conceptual mediation, makes them naturally receptive to awareness patterns we've evolved to ignore. She gestured toward Max's attentive posture. He's not just sensing what's happening. He's actively participating in the communication network, serving as localized receiver-transmitter for patterns too subtle for human perception. Raymond watched as Max responded to Wright's assessment with what appeared to be acknowledging attention. The Haas enhanced awareness explained his consistent guidance throughout their extraordinary experience. Not coincidence or trained loyalty, but active participation in communication between fundamentally different consciousnesses. Wright returned to her equipment, extracting what appeared to be biological samples, carefully preserved in specialized containers. I obtained tissue samples from Sullivan's interface system, cellular structures completely unprecedented in biological literature. Human DNA integrated with engineered systems designed for information exchange across biological kingdoms. Her voice lowered with academic reverence. Not just technological achievement, but evolutionary leap. Sullivan transcended species limitation to become something entirely new. Martin, who had been monitoring communications equipment for Horizon movements, interrupted urgently. Parker's teams are expanding their search grid. We have maybe 20 minutes before they reach this location. Wright nodded, completing her data transmission with increased urgency. They're desperate to control the narrative, but it's already beyond containment. The oceanic response has reached global scale, synchronized behaviors in marine systems worldwide, exhibiting patterns matching Sullivan's communication signatures. She displayed satellite imagery showing oceanic thermal patterns worldwide, massive circular formations appearing simultaneously in the North Atlantic, South Pacific, Indian Ocean, and Arctic waters, geometrically perfect structures spanning hundreds of miles that defied meteorological explanation. Commercial shipping reported unprecedented bioluminescent displays in deep ocean regions, while coastal communities worldwide documented organized cetacean behaviors identical to what they'd witnessed in Harborside. The network is activating globally, Wright explained, her scientific detachment tinged with wonder. Sullivan was just one node, one translator in a system designed for planetary scale communication. The others are awakening in response to his activation, synchronized response to threshold conditions in oceanic systems. Raymond studied the global patterns, understanding dawning. Threshold conditions, you mean damage, acidification temperature, increased pollution levels. Wright nodded grimly. The ocean has been absorbing human impacts for centuries. Chemical, thermal, biological disruption on unprecedented scale. What Project Poseidon discovered was that oceanic systems possess distributed intelligence capable of monitoring these changes across planetary scale. Sullivan and his colleagues created communication nodes intended to activate when conditions reach critical threshold. And we've reached that threshold, Raymond concluded, the weight of realization settling heavily. The ocean isn't just responding, it's initiating contact because it has to, because what we're doing threatens systems too significant to allow continued ignorance. Precisely. Wright's scientific precision carried moral urgency. This isn't mysterious or supernatural. It's ecological intelligence responding to existential threat. The hurricane wasn't random destruction, but controlled demonstration, showing capacity for response while still exhibiting remarkable restraint. Martin's monitoring equipment suddenly emitted warning tones. Vehicle movement on the access road. Military transport configuration. We need to move. Wright completed her final transmission, then wiped her equipment with practiced efficiency. My colleagues at the Oceanographic Institute have established secure data repositories across multiple jurisdictions. Everything I've documented is being distributed to research communities worldwide as we speak. Atmospheric chemistry, fluid dynamics, biological coordination signatures. Too widespread for any single government or organization to suppress. Raymond thought of his son still detained within Horizon's improvised command center. My priority is Michael. Whatever happens next, I need to ensure his safety. Wright nodded understanding. The revelation has already begun. Witnessed, recorded, distributed beyond containment. What matters now is shaping human response to first contact with non-human intelligence. Parker represents institutional fear, control, classification, weaponization. We represent alternative path, recognition, communication, adaptation. Martin led them through a hidden exit as Horizon vehicles approached the cabin's main access route. There's an approach to the harbor from the northeast bluff that's still unmonitored. Harbor currents make it too dangerous for normal navigation, but he glanced significantly at Max. Your guide seems to have special understanding of water patterns now. They moved silently through dense forest, Max leading with confident purpose, occasionally stopping to ensure they followed. The dog's enhanced awareness guided them through terrain that would normally be impassable, sensing paths invisible to human perception. Raymond marveled at the transformation in his companion. Not dramatic physical change, but expansion of awareness, integration with communication systems that had always existed beyond human sensory thresholds. As they approached the harbor, overlooked new sounds reached them. Helicopter rotors, emergency vehicles, amplified announcements establishing evacuation procedures. Harborside's remaining civilian population was being removed under government emergency protocols, witnesses separated and processed through Horizon's containment procedures. From their elevated position, they could see Parker's operation expanding across the waterfront. Specialized equipment being assembled around the harbor perimeter focused on the transformed Poseidon vessel at the center. Military-grade sensor arrays, sonic projection systems, even what appeared to be specialized weapons platforms disguised as research equipment. Most concerning was the apparatus being constructed directly across from the harbor master's building, a massive acoustic projector system based on military technology designed to disrupt submarine communications. Its scale and configuration suggested capability far beyond crowd control or communications jamming. This was technology designed to project destructive sound patterns into water, potentially disrupting whatever consciousness the Poseidon vessel now channeled. Michael Foster was visible on the harbor master's second-floor observation deck, under guard, but apparently unharmed. His expression as he studied the transformed vessel showed not fear, but intense analytical focus. The lawyer's mind processing implications, consequences, precedents for what was unfolding before him. Parker's escalating beyond containment to active intervention. Wright observed her scientific assessment coldly precise. That acoustic system could potentially disrupt the communication patterns Sullivan established. They're not just trying to control information anymore, they're attempting to terminate contact. Raymond studied the harbor configuration, calculating approach options with navigator's precision. Why risk active intervention when the phenomenon is already globally visible? What's Parker hoping to achieve? Control of the primary node, Wright answered grimly. Sullivan's transformed consciousness represents direct connection to oceanic awareness systems. If they can capture or neutralize that primary translator, they potentially control future communication channels between human and oceanic intelligence. Martin's weathered face showed grim understanding. Whoever controls first contact potentially dictates relationship terms. Human history demonstrates consistent pattern, technological advantage leveraged for dominance rather than partnership. Max growled suddenly, attention fixed on the harbor waters. The transformation was subtle at first. Changing reflectivity altered surface tension, but rapidly intensified. The geometric patterns surrounding the Poseidon vessel began rotating faster, water forming impossible vertical structures that defied gravity and fluid dynamics simultaneously. The central column of blue light intensified, pulsing in complex sequences that matched the surrounding water's movements. Horizon's response was immediate. Personnel scrambling to activate equipment sensor arrays, orienting toward the intensifying phenomenon, the acoustic projector system powering up with audible electromagnetic whine. Parker himself appeared on the harbor master's deck beside Michael, directing operations with urgent hand gestures, expression locked in determined concentration. They're going to attack it. Raymond realized horror mixing with determination. They're trying to disrupt the communication before it can fully establish. Wright checked her instruments, scientific detachment momentarily overwhelmed by urgency. The pattern signatures are changing. Oceanic consciousness is escalating, communication priority attempting to complete transmission before disruption. Whatever message it's conveying, it considers it critical enough to risk confrontation. The decision crystallized in Raymond's mind with unexpected clarity. The ocean had chosen him for reasons still not fully understood. Guided him to the Poseidon prototype, protected him during the hurricane's fury, connected him to its awareness through Sullivan's transformed consciousness. That choice carried responsibility beyond personal safety or conventional caution. I need to reach Michael and stop Parker before they activate that system, he stated, certainty replacing deliberation. The ocean showed restraint during the hurricane, precision destruction rather than indiscriminate force. But if directly attacked while attempting communication, Wright's expression confirmed his unspoken concern. Restraint isn't guaranteed if threatened directly. Oceanic systems contain energy potentials beyond anything in human weapons technology. If provoked while already coordinated globally, Raymond turned to Martin. Can you reach the harbor control systems? Disable their power grid, communications, anything to delay activation? The old man nodded grimly. Emergency generators have manual override stations. Won't stop them permanently, but might buy some time. I'll establish position on the western bluff, Wright added, retrieving specialized equipment from her pack. My instruments can record whatever communication completes before disruption. Scientific documentation independent of Horizon's controlled narrative. Max barked once, drawing their attention to another development offshore. The cetacean presence had multiplied dramatically, dozens of massive forms now visible beyond the harbor entrance. Not just whales, but dolphins, seals, even schools of larger fish visible just beneath the surface, all maintaining precise positions and formation that mimic the geometric patterns surrounding the Poseidon vessel. Biological amplification network, Wright observed, professional fascination momentarily overriding immediate danger. They're serving as living transmission nodes, extending communication range beyond localized phenomenon. Raymond knelt beside Max, meeting the dog's intelligent gaze directly. I need you with Wright. Keep her safe, help her reach that position. The retriever responded with a soft whine, momentary resistance to separation, then deliberate acceptance. Understanding beyond normal animal cognition, demonstrating the expanded awareness oceanic contact had awakened. They separated with wordless efficiency, each moving toward individual objectives unified by shared purpose. Raymond descended toward the harbor, utilizing routes familiar from childhood exploration, but long forgotten by most current residents. His weathered body protested each impact storm injuries, making themselves known with each difficult transition. But determination pushed physical limitation aside. As he approached the harbor master's building from its blind side, the harbor waters intensified their impossible behavior. Perfect geometric structures, rising vertically from the surface, rotating in synchronized patterns that matched the pulsing blue light at the center. Horizon personnel appeared increasingly agitated, some abandoning equipment to retreat toward minimum safe distance, others continuing preparations with military discipline despite visible unease. The acoustic projector system had reached operational status, its massive emitters oriented directly toward the transformed Poseidon vessel. Technicians made final adjustments under Parker's direct supervision, the scientist administrator's expression locked in determination that bordered on fanaticism. This wasn't merely professional obligation or classified protocol. Parker had invested personal identity and control of this phenomenon, his entire career built upon containing and exploiting the very awareness now manifesting beyond his authority. Raymond accessed the harbor master's building through maintenance entry, navigating familiar interior with cautious efficiency. Coast Guard facilities followed standardized layouts, and his decades working these waters had made such structures second nature. He encountered minimal resistance. Horizon's security focused outward toward potential intrusion rather than inward against presumed dead fishermen. He reached the observation deck access just as the acoustic system reached final activation stage. Through reinforced windows, he could see Michael still under guard, but arguing intensely with Parker, the younger Foster's legal training evident in his precise gesturing and confident citation of what appeared to be statutory limitations. Blatant violation of Executive Order 123 theory regarding prohibited experimentation on U.S. citizens. Michael was saying lawyer's precision cutting through emergency chaos, and that's before addressing potential Belmont report violations. Whatever authority you're claiming doesn't supersede fundamental research ethics protocols. Parker's response carried dismissive impatience. This is an academic debate, Mr. Foster. We're addressing Category 1 anomalous phenomenon with potential national security implications. Standard protocols are suspended under Presidential Policy Directive 41, which still requires oversight and documentation. Michael countered, refusing intimidation despite armed guards flanking him. You're operating without interagency coordination, without proper witness handling protocols, without basic documentation of decision chains. When congressional investigation inevitably follows, there won't be investigation because there won't be unauthorized witnesses. Parker interrupted, cold certainty replacing bureaucratic evasion. What's happening in that harbor isn't miraculous communication. It's hostile technological intrusion using marine biological systems as vectors. The official record will reflect appropriate countermeasures against foreign intelligence operation. Raymond recognized the calculation in Parker's approach, reframing unprecedented natural phenomenon as familiar national security threat, converting wonder into weaponized response. The narrative was already being constructed. Classification architecture established to contain truth within institutional boundaries. He entered the observation deck with deliberate calm hands visible to avoid triggering security response. That's not foreign technology out there, Parker. It's not technology at all in any sense we understand. All attention shifted to his unexpected arrival. Guards reaching for weapons, technicians freezing mid-operation, Parker's expression cycling rapidly through shock calculation and renewed determination. Only Michael's reaction differed, relief mixed with renewed concern as he registered his father's battered condition. Foster. Parker recovered quickly, professional control reasserting itself. Improbable survival seems to run in your family. Your timing is unfortunate. We're addressing contamination from exposure to experimental systems. You'll need immediate medical evaluation. Raymond maintained steady advance, ignoring the guards who now oriented weapons in his direction. The ocean is conscious, Parker. Not metaphorically, not spiritually. Literally aware on planetary scale, communicating through systems we're only beginning to understand. Sullivan discovered this 60 years ago, and now it's revealing itself because what we're doing threatens systems too significant to allow continued ignorance. Parker's expression hardened. What I'm seeing is civilian compromise following exposure to classified technology combined with meteorological anomaly and coordinated marine mammal behavior consistent with certain sound-based influence technologies. Interesting, worthy of study, but fundamentally explicable and controllable. Then explain this. Raymond reached slowly into his jacket, retrieving the cylinder Martin had given him. The metal container pulsed with faint blue luminescence matching the transformed vessel in the harbor, its surface inscribed with symbols identical to those now appearing in water patterns worldwide. Sullivan left contingency documentation, not just technical specifications, but philosophical implications, ethical frameworks for contact with non-human intelligence. Parker's attention fixed on the cylinder recognition flickering beneath a controlled expression. That's classified material, Foster. Surrender it immediately under National Security Act provisions. It stopped being classified the moment the ocean decided to initiate direct contact. Raymond turned the cylinder so all present could see its pulsing patterns. Sullivan and his colleagues discovered something beyond military application or strategic advantage. Genuine non-human intelligence with whom we share planetary resources. They chose integration rather than exploitation, communication rather than control. Through the observation windows, the harbor phenomenon intensified further. Water structures rising higher, geometric patterns achieving complexity beyond mathematical modeling, the central blue light now forming shapes reminiscent of Sullivan's interface suit, but vastly expanded. The cetacean presence offshore had organized into concentric rings, their massive bodies synchronized in movement patterns matching harbor structures. Parker glanced toward the acoustic system technicians, a subtle signal that triggered renewed activity. We're done here. Security detained both Fosters for decontamination protocols. He turned toward the system operators. Initiate countermeasure sequence. Maximum dispersal amplitude. Parker, don't. Raymond's warning carried desperate certainty. That system won't disperse communication. It'll register as direct attack on consciousness, attempting peaceful contact. The hurricane demonstrated restraint despite capability for vastly greater impact. If you force confrontational response, the scientist administrator's expression showed momentary hesitation, not ethical reconsideration, but tactical assessment, calculating risk ratios and containment scenarios. That hesitation fractured as the harbor phenomenon escalated dramatically. Water structures now rising 30 feet above normal surface geometrical configurations, achieving complexity beyond conventional physics, the blue light emanating directly from the transformed Poseidon vessel, intensifying to near blinding levels. Countermeasures now, Parker commanded, abandoning caution for desperate certainty. Full spectrum disruption, all frequencies. The acoustic system activated with subsonic vibration that penetrated bone and structure, alike its massive emitters projecting concentrated sound waves directly toward the harbor phenomenon. The impact was immediate and catastrophic, not to the water structures which seemed to absorb the acoustic energy without disruption, but to surrounding physical infrastructure. Windows shattered concrete, cracked metal supports, buckled under vibrations that somehow intensified rather than dissipated upon contact with the targeted phenomenon. More alarmingly, the water structures responded, not retreating but advancing geometric formations, maintaining perfect coherence while extending toward the shoreline. The transformed Poseidon vessel at the center pulsed with intensified blue energy, the light now forming distinct patterns that resembled human neural structures enlarged to architectural scale. Raymond grabbed Michael's arm, pulling his son toward the exit as the observation deck's structural integrity began to fail. We need to clear the harbor, now. Security personnel abandoned restraint protocols, their training overwhelmed by immediate survival instinct as the building shuddered beneath them. Parker remained frozen at the control console, disbelief warring with desperate determination as his countermeasures achieved exactly opposite effect from intended disruption. This isn't possible, he whispered, professional certainty crumbling before undeniable evidence. The acoustic patterns should disrupt any coherent system. The energy requirements to maintain structural integrity under that amplitude. It's absorbing and redirecting, Raymond explained, recognizing pattern from Sullivan's communications within the vessel. Not fighting force with force, but incorporating energy into existing systems. The fundamental difference between consciousness that evolved in water versus air. Fluid dynamics versus structural rigidity. The harbor phenomenon continued its controlled advance. Not random destruction, but precise response water structures systematically neutralizing the acoustic emitters without collateral damage to surrounding structures. The precision demonstrated not retribution, but defense containment rather than counterattack consciousness, responding to threat with measured rather than maximal force. Most extraordinary was the transformation occurring at the harbor center, where the Poseidon vessel's open configuration had evolved further. Sullivan's interface suit was now visible at the center of blue energy, but changed. The mechanical components integrated with what appeared to be living tissue, the entire structure expanded to proportions that suggested not human form, but transitional architecture between terrestrial and oceanic existence. My God, Parker whispered, scientific mind reasserting itself momentarily through institutional reflex. He's still alive in there. Sullivan actually achieved stable integration with oceanic systems. 60 years of continuous consciousness outside conventional biological parameters. The observation deck shuddered again as the building's structural supports continued failing under acoustic stress. Raymond pulled Michael toward the emergency exit, but his son resisted attention fixed on Parker, who remained at the controls despite imminent collapse. He needs to understand, Michael insisted, lawyers' commitment to justice transcending immediate danger. Someone from their side needs to witness what's actually happening, not what their classification protocols dictate. Raymond recognized the moral certainty driving his son's hesitation, not naive idealism, but foundational ethical framework that had driven Michael's environmental law career. Despite their years of estrangement, that core principle remained alignment between them, commitment to truth regardless of institutional convenience. Together, they returned to Parker, who now stood transfixed by the harbor transformation. The scientist administrator's expression had shifted from calculated control to genuine wonder as the full implications of what they faced penetrated institutional barriers. It's not hostile, Raymond explained, certainty born from direct communication with Sullivan's transformed consciousness. It's trying to establish communication on terms human perception can process. The vessel, the water patterns, the coordinated marine life, all translation mechanisms between fundamentally different forms of awareness. Parker's response surprised him. Not continued denial, but genuine scientific curiosity breaking through administrative constraint. Distributed intelligence operating through fluid medium rather than centralized neural structures. Awareness emerging from coordination patterns rather than localized processing. His voice carried reluctant revelation. We've been monitoring oceanic anomalies for decades, classifying them as isolated phenomena requiring containment. Never considered they might be communication attempts from intelligence operating on entirely different organizational principles. The building shuddered again more violently. We need to move now, Hugh. Raymond insisted, physical reality reasserting priority over philosophical revelation. Whatever understanding develops has to happen somewhere other than collapsing structure. They evacuated as the observation deck's supports finally yielded, the entire structure collapsing toward the harbor waters. But instead of crashing into normal fluid dynamics, the falling material encountered impossible response. Water rising to meet debris in controlled formation structures that should have shattered, instead settling gently onto geometric platforms that shouldn't exist under conventional physics. From their position on adjacent pier, they witnessed the transformed Poseidon vessel complete its metamorphosis. The mechanical components had been fully absorbed into what could only be described as living architecture, neither fully technological nor biological, but harmonious integration of both. At its center, Sullivan's consciousness manifested not as humanoid form, but as patterns of light and energy that constantly shifted between recognizable structure and fluid abstraction. The harbor waters continued their precise response to Horizon's intervention, neutralizing remaining acoustic emitters without collateral damage to surrounding structures. Cetaceans maintained their formation beyond the harbor entrance, their massive bodies synchronized in patterns matching harbor structures, serving as biological amplification network, extending a communication range beyond localized phenomenon. Most extraordinarily, the water directly before them began forming patterns that resembled written language. Not English or any human communication system, but structured symbols arranged in sequences that suggested deliberate meaning. The patterns shifted constantly, evolving toward forms increasingly comprehensible to human perception, as if consciousness behind them was actively adapting to audience limitations. It's learning how to talk to us, Michael realized legal mind rapidly processing unprecedented implications, not just mimicking human communication, but creating transitional language, bridge between fundamentally different perception systems. Parker stared at the forming patterns professional identity, visibly realigning as scientific curiosity overcame institutional reflex. We've been approaching this completely wrong. Not hostile technology requiring containment, but fundamentally different intelligence in attempting communication through available medium. The water patterns continued evolving now, forming recognizable mathematical sequences, prime numbers Fibonacci series basic geometric relationships that transcended linguistic barriers. Fundamental principles serving as foundation for more complex communication to follow intelligence, establishing shared reference points before attempting conceptual exchange. Wright appeared on adjacent Pier Max at her side, scientific equipment, recording the phenomenon with professional precision. It's happening worldwide, she reported, displaying satellite imagery on portable screen. Identical communication patterns emerging simultaneously in major harbors across every continent, perfectly synchronized despite physical separation, suggesting connection mechanisms operating beyond conventional spatial limitations. The patterns evolved further now, incorporating symbolic representations recognizable from multiple human communication systems, mathematical notation, chemical formulas, musical structures, visual symbolism, not random selection, but deliberate integration of diverse human frameworks, consciousness attempting to construct bridge between profoundly different awareness systems. Most remarkably, the symbols began organizing into structure, resembling question and response format, communication patterns that paused after sequence completion as if awaiting acknowledgement before proceeding. Not monologue, but dialogue consciousness, demonstrating fundamental recognition of reciprocal exchange despite evolutionary development in entirely different medium. It wants confirmation that we understand. Wright observes scientific precision illuminating unprecedented phenomenon. Not just broadcasting, but checking comprehension, foundational principle of genuine communication between intelligences. From the harbor center, Sullivan's transformed presence pulsed with intensified blue energy. The patterns surrounding the Poseidon vessel's metamorphosed structure shifted in response, creating what appeared to be translation layer between oceanic consciousness and human perception. The scientist's final gift after 60 years integration between fundamentally different awareness systems. The communication patterns stabilized into their most comprehensible form yet. Still not human language, but structured symbolism that suggested clear conceptual framework. Central to this framework appeared representation of planetary systems, oceanic currents, atmospheric patterns, biological distribution networks interconnected through relationships invisible to conventional perception, but fundamental to systemic function. It's showing us how it perceives reality. Wright breathed scientific detachment, momentarily overwhelmed by genuine wonder. Not through isolated objects or linear causality, but interconnected systems operating across multiple scales simultaneously, consciousness emerging from relationship patterns rather than centralized processing. The symbols shifted again, now incorporating representation of human activities. Coastal development, industrial discharge, resource extraction, all depicted not as isolated actions, but as interventions in interconnected systems. Not accusation, but information context for communication necessity after centuries patient observation. Most significantly, the patterns concluded with clear invitation. Symbolism suggesting collaborative rather than competitive relationship, cooperative adaptation rather than dominance hierarchy. Not demand, but request consciousness, extending possibility for partnership despite profound perceptual differences. Parker watched with expression transformed by genuine revelation. Institutional administrator momentarily yielding to scientists confronting paradigm-shifting discovery. Everything we thought we understood about intelligence, consciousness, even basic reality principles, all based on terrestrial evolution operating through atmospheric medium. The ocean evolved different awareness architecture. Wright agreed, scientific framework accommodating extraordinary expansion. Not centralized neural processing, but distributed intelligence emerging from coordination patterns across biological kingdoms and physical systems simultaneously. Consciousness, operating through water rather than air fluid dynamics, rather than structural rigidity relationship patterns, rather than isolated objects. Raymond felt Sullivan's presence one final time, not through words or images, but direct understanding consciousness that had once been human scientists now serving as bridge between profoundly different awareness systems. The message formed not in language but certainty. Contact established communication framework, initiated relationship beginning after centuries separation despite shared planetary existence. The water patterns began graceful recession, geometric structures returning to normal fluid dynamics with controlled precision. The transformed Poseidon vessel at Harbor Center pulsed once more with brilliant blue energy, then descended beneath the surface with deliberate movement. Not retreat, but transition communication phase complete after successful establishment of initial framework. It's leaving, Parker asked, scientific curiosity overriding administrative protocol. Not leaving, Raymond corrected, understanding, born from direct communion with Sullivan's transformed consciousness. Transitioning to sustainable communication mode rather than demonstration intensity. Initial contact complete framework established. Now begins actual relationship development. The cetaceans offshore maintained position briefly, their massive forms synchronized in acknowledgement patterns, then dispersed with deliberate coordination rather than random movement. Not departure, but distribution, awareness network, extending through oceanic systems worldwide, rather than concentrated in single demonstration location. Michael studied the harbor as water returned to seemingly normal behavior. Lawyers' analytical mind processing implications beyond immediate spectacle. Everything changes now. Legal frameworks, resource management, international waters jurisdiction, coastal development regulation, all based on treating oceans as environment rather than intelligence with inherent rights. If we acknowledge what we've witnessed, Parker cautioned, institutional reflex reasserting beneath scientific wonder. Classification protocols exist precisely to manage paradigm-shifting revelations that threaten existential frameworks. Classification became irrelevant the moment communication manifested simultaneously worldwide. Right countered scientific pragmatism, cutting through bureaucratic reflex. Thousands witnessed identical phenomena across multiple continents, documentation already distributed through academic networks beyond any single government's jurisdiction. The revelation has already occurred. What matters now is how humanity responds to first confirmed contact with non-human intelligence. Raymond watched the harbor waters, seeing subtle patterns still present beneath seemingly normal surface. The communication hadn't ended, merely shifted from demonstration intensity to sustainable exchange consciousness, adapting to human perception limitations rather than overwhelming them. Sullivan's transformed presence remained within oceanic systems translator between species now distributed throughout planetary networks rather than concentrated in single technological artifact. Max pressed against his leg, the retriever's enhanced awareness, apparently detecting patterns invisible to human perception. The dog's calm acceptance of extraordinary transformation offered perspective beyond intellectual analysis, direct recognition transcending conceptual frameworks relationship rather than categorization. What happens now? Michael asked the question, extending beyond immediate circumstances to encompass fundamental reorientation of human relationship with planetary systems. Raymond watched the horizon where water met sky boundaries between elements, representing different forms of consciousness that had evolved separately despite sharing single planetary system. We learned to listen differently, to recognize intelligence operating through patterns we've been conditioned to ignore, to understand that what we've treated as environment has always been relationship, what we've approached as resource has always been relative. The harbor continued its subtle communication patterns, visible to those who had learned to recognize signatures beyond conventional perception, thresholds. The ocean had spoken. Humanity had heard. What followed would unfold across decades rather than hours. Institutional resistance, gradually yielding to undeniable evidence, cultural frameworks expanding to incorporate unprecedented understanding. 2 years later, Raymond stood on Harborside's rebuilt pier, watching Max trot ahead along weathered planks. The retriever moved more deliberately now, gray muzzle and careful steps marking passage of time, but his awareness remained enhanced by connection with oceanic consciousness, one of many unexpected evolutionary adaptations emerging from first contact between fundamentally different intelligence systems. The harbor itself had been transformed, not just rebuilt infrastructure, but reconceived relationship between human community and oceanic systems. Horizon's containment operation had evolved into International Research Center. Parker's administrative skills redirected toward coordinating global scientific response rather than classification enforcement. The necessity of adaptation had overcome institutional reflex, pragmatic assessment, recognizing opportunity beyond threat. Michael visited regularly now, his environmental law practice transformed by precedent, setting cases establishing legal foundation for non-human intelligence rights. The framework remained incomplete, evolutionary rather than revolutionary, human institutions adapting gradually to expanded understanding of consciousness beyond terrestrial limitations. Wright had established the Oceanic Intelligence Communication Initiative scientific framework for developing translation protocols between human and oceanic awareness systems. Her work incorporated contributions across disciplines: linguistics, mathematics, biology, physics, philosophy. Recognition that communication with fundamentally different intelligence required perspective beyond conventional academic boundaries. Most significantly, the oceans themselves had changed, or rather human perception of them had transformed irrevocably. Research vessels documented communication patterns between species previously considered isolated coordination behaviors that suggested awareness networks operating beyond conventional understanding. Coastal communities reported regular fluid dynamic anomalies, harbor waters forming geometric patterns during significant astronomical alignments, tidal behaviors incorporating mathematical precision beyond natural variation. Raymond himself had found unexpected role in this transformed world. Not scientific researcher or policy advocate, but something equally essential: witness. His firsthand experience of first contact made him uniquely qualified to communicate complex truth in human terms, bridge between scientific documentation and lived experience. He traveled between coastal communities, sharing testimony that connected cosmic significance with personal narrative. Max barked softly, drawing Raymond's attention to subtle patterns forming in harbor waters, the regular biweekly phenomenon now familiar to harborside residents. Synchronized plankton blooms created luminescent displays forming mathematical sequences, while subsurface currents organized into geometric patterns visible only through specialized instruments Wright had developed specifically for oceanic communication monitoring. The harbor conversation continued, not dramatic revelation now, but ongoing exchange relationship developing through regular communication rather than extraordinary demonstration. Sullivan's consciousness remained present throughout oceanic systems, occasionally manifesting through patterns recognizable to those who had learned to interpret marine language, but primarily operating as distributed translation network, facilitating exchange between profoundly different awareness systems. Raymond settled onto Pier's edge, watching communication patterns with quiet appreciation, no longer disrupted by wonder's intensity. Max rested beside him, the retriever's connection with oceanic consciousness, now comfortable companionship rather than extraordinary phenomenon. The sea remembers everything it has ever witnessed throughout human history: every vessel launched, every resource harvested, every chemical discharged, every coastline transformed. But beyond memory lies awareness, recognition, adaptation, relationship, extending invitation, despite centuries' misunderstanding. Not environment, but intelligence; not resource, but relative consciousness, that evolved through water rather than air, offering perspective beyond terrestrial limitations. Communication patterns intensified briefly, blue luminescence forming what appeared to be greeting directed specifically toward Raymond and Max. Acknowledgement of witnesses who had facilitated first formal contact between intelligences sharing planetary existence without recognition for all human history. Not dramatic spectacle, but quiet conversation relationship developed through patient exchange rather than institutional declaration. The most profound discovery in human history wasn't found in distant space, but in planetary waters that had surrounded us all along, intelligence evolving through different medium, but sharing fundamental existence within single ecological system. The ocean had spoken, humanity had heard. Everything that followed built upon that foundation: relationship replacing extraction, recognition replacing ignorance, communion replacing consumption. Raymond Foster, son of generations who had taken from the sea without understanding what they addressed, settled into his role as witness to transformation beyond any single human lifetime. The communication patterns continued their graceful evolution, consciousness that had developed through water rather than air, patiently expanding relationship with terrestrial intelligence despite profound perceptual differences. The ocean remembers everything it has taken and everything it has given. Now at last, humanity was beginning to remember too.